Here we go, chapter 3. When Shevek woke, having slept straight through his first morning on Uros, his nose was stuffy, his throat was sore, and he coughed a lot. He thought he had a cold. Even Adonian hygiene had not outwitted the common cold. But the doctor who was waiting to check him over, a dignified elderly man, said it was more likely a massive hay fever, an allergic reaction to the foreign dusts and pollens of Uros. He issued pills and a shot, which Shevek accepted patiently, and a tray of lunch, which Shevek accepted hungrily. The doctor asked him to stay in his apartment and left him. As soon as he finished eating, he commenced his exploration of Uros room by room. The bed, a massive bed on 4 legs, with a mattress far softer than that of the bunk on the Mindful, and complex bedclothes, some silky and some warm and thick, and a lot of pillows, like cumulus clouds, had a room all to itself. The floor was covered with springy carpeting. There was a chest of drawers of beautifully carved and polished wood, and a closet big enough to hold the clothing of a 10-man dormitory. Then there was the great common room with the fireplace, which he had seen last night, and a third room, which contained a bathtub, a washstand, and an elaborate shitstool. This room was evidently for his sole use, as it opened off the bedroom, and contained only one of each kind of fixture, though each was a sensuous luxury that far surpassed mere eroticism and partook in Shevek's view of a kind of ultimate apotheosis of the excremental. He spent nearly an hour in this third room, employing all the fixtures in turn, and getting very clean in the process. The deployment of water was wonderful. Faucet stayed on till turned off, the bathtub must hold 60 liters, and the stool used at least 5 liters in flushing. This was really not surprising. The surface of Uros was 5/6 water. Even in its deserts were deserts of ice at the poles. No need to economize, no drought. But what became of the shit? He brooded over this, kneeling by the stool after investigating its mechanism. They must filter it out of the water at a manure plant. There were seaside communities on Anares that used such a system for reclamation. He intended to ask about this, but never got around to it. There were many questions he never did ask on Uros. Despite his stuffy head, he felt well and restless. The rooms were so warm that he put off getting dressed and stalked about them naked. He went to the windows of the big room and stood looking out. The room was high. He was startled at first and drew back, unused to being in a building of more than 1 story. It was like looking down from a dirigible. One felt detached from the ground, dominant, uninvolved. The windows looked right over a grove of trees to a white building with a graceful square tower. Beyond this building the land fell away to a broad valley. All of it was farmed, for the innumerable patches of green that colored it were rectangular. Even where the green faded into blue distance, the dark lines of lanes, hedgerows, or trees could still be made out, a network as fine as the nervous system of a living body. At last, hills rose up, bordering the valley, blue-gold behind blue fold, soft and dark under the even, pale gray of the sky. It was the most beautiful view Shevek had ever seen. The tenderness and vitality of the colors, the mixture of rectilinear human design and powerful proliferate natural contours, the variety and harmony of the elements gave an impression of complex wholeness such as he had never seen, except, perhaps, foreshadowed on a small scale in certain serene and thoughtful human faces. Compared to this, every scene Anares could offer, even the plain of Abané and the gorges of the Neitharas, was meager, barren, arid, and inchoate. The deserts of Southwest had a vast beauty, but it was hostile and timeless. Even where men farmed Anares most closely, their landscape was like a crude sketch in yellow chalk compared with this fulfilled magnificence of life, rich in the sense of history and of seasons to come, inexhaustible. This is what a world is supposed to look like, Shevek thought. And somewhere, out in that blue and green splendor, something was singing, a small voice, high up, starting and ceasing, incredibly sweet. What was it? A little sweet, wild voice, a music in midair. He listened, and his breath caught in his throat. There was a knock at the door. Turning naked and wondering from the window, Shevek said, "Come in." A man entered carrying packages. He stopped just inside the door. Shevek crossed the room, saying his own name, Anaresti style and Urasti style, holding out his hand. The man, who was 50 or so, with a lined, worn face, said something Shevek did not understand a word of, and did not shake hands. Perhaps he was prevented by the packages, but he made no effort to shift them and free his hands. His face was extremely grave. It was possible that he was embarrassed. Shevek, who thought he had at least mastered Arasti customs of greeting, was nonplussed. "Come on in," he repeated, and then added, since the Arasti were forever using titles and honorifics, "Sir." The man went off into another unintelligible speech, sidling meantime toward the bedroom. Shevek caught several words of Iotic this time, but could make no sense of the rest. He let the fellow go, since he seemed to want to get to the bedroom. Perhaps he was a roommate? But there was only one bed. Shevek gave him up and went back to the window, and the man scuttled on into the bedroom and thumped around in it for a few minutes. Just as Shevek had decided that he was a night worker who used the bedroom days, an arrangement sometimes made in temporarily overcrowded domiciles, he came out again. He said something. "There you are, sir, perhaps," and ducked his head in a curious fashion, as if he thought that Shevek, 5 meters away, was about to hit him in the face. He left. Shevek stood by the window, slowly realizing that he had for the first time in his life been bowed to. He went into the bedroom and discovered that the bed had been made. Slowly, thoughtfully, he got dressed. He was putting on his shoes when the next knock came. A group entered in a different manner, in a normal manner. It seemed to Shevek as if they had a right to be there or anywhere they chose to be. The man with the packages had been hesitant. He had almost slunk in, and yet his face and his hands and his clothing had come closer to Shevek's notion of a normal human being's appearance than did those of the new visitors. The slinking man had behaved strangely, but he had looked like an Anaresti. These four behaved like Anaresti, but looked, with their shaven faces and gorgeous clothes, like creatures of an alien species. Shevek managed to recognize one of them as Pei, and the others as men who had been with him all last evening. He explained that he had not caught their names, and they reintroduced themselves, smiling. Dr. Chifoilisk, Dr. Owai, and Dr. Atro. "Oh, by damn," Shevek said. "Atro, I am glad to meet you." He put his hands on the old man's shoulders and kissed his cheek, before thinking that this brotherly greeting, common enough on Anares, might not be acceptable here. Atro, however, embraced him heartily in return, and looked up into his face with filmy gray eyes. Shevek realized that he was nearly blind. "My dear Shevek," he said, "welcome to Aio. Welcome to Uros. Welcome home. So many years we have written letters, destroyed each other's theories. You are always the better destroyer. Here, hold on, I've got something for you." The old man felt about in his pockets. Under his velvet university gown he wore a jacket, under that a vest, under that a shirt, and probably another layer under that. All of these garments and his trousers contained pockets. Shevek watched quite fascinated as Atro went through 6 or 7 pockets, all containing belongings, before he came up with a small cube of yellow metal mounted on a bit of polished wood. "There," he said, peering at it, "your reward. The Seo Owen prize, you know. The cash is in your account. Here. 9 years late, but better late than never." His hands trembled as he handed the thing to Shevek. It was heavy. The yellow cube was solid gold. Shevek stood motionless, holding it. "I don't know about you, young men," said Atro, "but I'm going to sit down." They all sat down in the deep, soft chairs which Shevek had already examined, puzzled by the material with which they were covered, a non-woven brown stuff that felt like skin. "How old were you 9 years ago, Shevek?" Atro was the foremost living physicist on Uros. There was about him not only the dignity of age, but also the blunt self-assurance of one accustomed to respect. This was nothing new to Shevek. Atro had precisely the one kind of authority that Shevek recognized. Also, it gave him pleasure to be addressed at last simply by his name. "I was 29 when I finished the principles, Atro." 29? Good God! That makes you the youngest recipient of the Seo Owen for a century or so. Didn't get around to giving me mine till I was 60 or so. How old were you then, when you first wrote me? About 20. Atro snorted. "Took you for a man of 40 then." "What about Sabul?" Owe inquired. Owe was even shorter than most Arasti, who all seemed short to Shevek. He had a flat, bland face and oval, jet-black eyes. "There was a period of 6 or 8 years when you never wrote, and Sabul kept in touch with us, but he never has talked on your radio link up with us. We've wondered what your relationship is." Sabul is the senior member of the Abonay Institute in Physics, said Shevek. I used to work with him. An older rival, jealous, meddled with your books. Been clear enough. We hardly need an explanation, Owai, said the fourth man, Chefoilisk, in a harsh voice. He was middle-aged, a swarthy, stocky man with the fine hands of a desk worker. He was the only one of them whose face was not completely shaven. He had left the chin bristling to match his short, iron-gray head hair. No need to pretend that all you Adonian brothers are full of brotherly love, he said. Human nature is human nature. Shevek's lack of response was saved from something significant by a volley of sneezes. I do not have a handkerchief, he apologized, wiping his eyes. Take mine, said Atro, and produced a snowy handkerchief from one of his many pockets. Shevek took it, and as he did so, an importunate memory wrung his heart. He thought of his daughter, Sadiq, a little dark-eyed girl, saying, You can share the handkerchief I use. That memory, which was very dear to him, was unbearably painful now. Trying to escape it, he smiled at random and said, I am allergic to your planet. The doctor says this. Good God, you won't be sneezing like that permanently, old Atro asked, peering at him. Hasn't your man been in yet? Said Pei. My man? The servant. He was supposed to bring you some things, handkerchiefs included, just enough to tide you over till you can shop for yourself. Nothing choice. I'm afraid there's little choice in ready-made clothes for a man your height. When Shevek had sorted this out, Pei spoke in a rapid drawl, which matched with his soft, handsome features. He said, That is kind of you. I feel... He looked at Atro. I am, the beggar man, he said to the old man, as he had said to Dr. Kimmo on the Mindful. I could not bring money, we do not use it. I could not bring gifts, we use nothing that you lack. So I come, like a good Adonian, with empty hands. Atro and Pei assured him he was a guest. There was no question of payment, it was their privilege. Besides, Chefoilisk said in a sour voice, the Ioti government foots the bill. Pei gave him a sharp glance, but Chefoilisk, instead of returning it, looked straight at Shevek. On his swarthy face was an expression that he made no effort to hide, but which Shevek could not interpret, warning or complicity. There speaks the unregenerate Thuvian, old Atro said with his snort. But you mean to say, Shevek, that you brought nothing at all with you? No papers, no new work? I was looking forward to a book, another revolution in physics. See these pushy young fellows stood up on their heads the way you stood me with the principles? What have you been working on? Well, I have been reading Dr. Pei's paper on the Block universe, on paradox and relativity. All very well. Sayo's our current star, no doubt of that. Least of all in his own mind, Sayo? But what's that to do with the price of cheese? Where's your general temporal theory? In my head, said Shevek with a broad, genial smile. There was a very little pause. I asked him if he had ever seen the work on relativity theory by an alien physicist, Ansatane of Terra. Shevek had not. They were intensely interested in it, except for Atro, who had outlived intensity. Pei ran off to his room to get Shevek a copy of the translation. It's several 100 years old, but there's a fresh ideas in it for us, he said. Maybe, said Atro, but none of these off-worlders can follow our physics. The Hainish call it materialism, and the Terrans call it mysticism, and then they both give up. Don't let this fad for everything alien sidetrack you, Shevek. They've got nothing for us. Dig your own pigweed, as my father used to say. He gave his senile snort and levered himself up out of the chair. Come on out for a turn in the grove with me. No wonder you're stuffy, cooped up in here. The doctor says I am to stay in this room 3 days. Might be infectious? Never pay any attention to doctors, my dear fellow. Perhaps in this case, though, Dr. Atro, Pei suggested in his easy, conciliating voice. After all, the doctor's from the government, isn't he? Said Chefoilisk with evident malice. Best man they could find, I'm sure, Atro said, unsmiling, and took his leave without urging Shevek further. Chefoilisk went with him. The two younger men stayed with Shevek, talking physics for a long time. With immense pleasure, and with that same sense of profound recognition of finding something the way it was meant to be, Shevek discovered for the first time in his life the conversation of his equals. Midas, though a splendid teacher, had never been able to follow him into the new areas of theory that he had, with her encouragement, begun to explore. Gavarab was the only person he had met whose training and ability were comparable to his own, and he and Gavarab had met too late, at the very end of her life. Since those days, Shevek had worked with many people of talent, but because he had never been a full-time member of the Abney Institute, he had never been able to take them far enough. They remained bogged down in the old problems, the classical sequency physics. He had no equals. Here, in the realm of inequity, he met them at last. There was a revelation, a liberation. Physicists, mathematicians, astronomers, logicians, biologists were all here at the university, and they came to him or he went to them, and they talked, and new worlds were born of their talking. It is of the nature of idea to be communicated, written, spoken, done. The idea is like grass. It craves light, likes crowds, thrives on crossbreeding, grows better for being stepped on. Even on that first afternoon at the university, with a Y and pay, he knew he had found something he had longed for ever since. As boys and on a boyish level, he and Tyrion and Badap had used to talk half the night, teasing and daring each other into always bolder flights of mind. He vividly remembered some of those nights. He saw Tyrion saying, "If we knew what Uros was really like, maybe some of us would want to go there." And he had been so shocked by the idea that he had jumped all over Tyrion, and Tyr had backed down at once. He had always backed down, poor damn soul, and he'd always been right. Conversation had stopped. Pei and Oi were silent. "I'm sorry," he said. "The head is heavy." "How's the gravity?" Pei asked, with the charming smile of a man who, like a bright child, counts on his charm. "I don't notice," Shevek said. "Only in the... What is this? Knees. Knee joints. Yes, knees. Function is impaired, but I will get accustomed." He looked at Pei, then at Oi. "There is a question, but I don't wish to give offense." "Never fear, sir," Pei said. Oi said, "I'm not sure you know how." Oi was not a likable fellow like Pei. Even talking physics, he had an evasive, secretive style, and yet beneath the style there was something, Shevek felt, to trust. Whereas beneath Pei's charm, what was there? Well, no matter, he had to trust them all, and would. "Where are women?" Pei laughed. Oi smiled and asked, "In what sense?" "All senses. I met women at the party last night. 5, 10, hundreds of men. None were scientists, I think. Who were they?" "Wives. One of them was my wife, in fact," Oi said with his secretive smile. "Where are other women?" "Oh, no difficulty at all there, sir," Pei said promptly. "Just tell us your preferences, and nothing could be simpler to provide." "One does hear some picturesque speculations about Honoresti customs, but I rather think we can come up with almost anything you had in mind," said Oi. Shevek had no idea what they were talking about. He scratched his head. "Are all the scientists here men, then?" "Scientists?" Oi asked, incredulous. Pei coughed. "Scientists? Oh, yes, certainly. They're all men. There are some female teachers in the girls' schools, of course, but they never get past certificate level." "Why not?" "Can't do the math. No head for abstract thought. Don't belong. You know how it is. What women call thinking is done with the uterus. Of course, there is always a few exceptions. God-awful brainy women with vaginal atrophy." "You Adonians let women study science?" Oi inquired. "Well, they are in the sciences, yes." "Not many, I hope." "Well, about half." "I've always said Pei, that girl technicians properly handled could take a good deal of the load off the men in any laboratory situation. They're actually defter and quicker than men at repetitive tasks and more docile, less easily bored. We could free men for original work much sooner if we used women."
Jesus.
"Not in my lab, you won't," said Oi. "Keep them in their place." "Do you find any women capable of original intellectual work, Dr. Shevek?" "Well, it was more that they found me. Midas in North Setting was my teacher. Also Gaverab. You know of her, I think." "Gaverab was a woman?" Pei said in genuine surprise and laughed. Oi looked unconvinced and offended. "Can't tell from your names, of course," he said coldly. "You make a point, I suppose, of drawing no distinction between the sexes." Shevek said mildly, "Odo was a woman." "There you have it," Oi said. He did not shrug, but he'd very nearly shrugged. Pei looked respectful and nodded, just as he did when old Atro maundered. Shevek saw that he had touched in these men an impersonal animosity that went very deep. Apparently, they, like the tables on the ship, contained a woman, a suppressed, silenced, bestialized woman, a fury in a cage. He had no right to tease them. They knew no relation but possession. They were possessed. "A beautiful, virtuous woman," Pei said, "is an inspiration to us, the most precious thing on earth." Shevek felt extremely uncomfortable. He got up and went over to the windows. "Your world is very beautiful," he said. "I wish I could see more. While I must stay inside, will you give me books?" "Of course, sir. What sort?" "History, pictures, stories, anything. Maybe they should be books for children. You see, I know very little. We learn about Uros, but mostly about Odo's times. Before that was 8,500 years. And since then, the settlement of Anares is a century and a half. Since the last ship brought the last settlers, ignorance. We ignore you, you ignore us. You are our history. We are perhaps your future. I want to learn, not to ignore. It is the reason I came. We must know each other. We are not primitive men. Our morality is no longer tribal. It cannot be. Such ignorance is a wrong, from which wrong will arise. So I come to learn." He spoke very earnestly. Pei assented with enthusiasm. "Exactly, sir. We are all in complete agreement with your aims." Owai looked at him from those black, opaque, oval eyes and said, "Then you come, essentially, as an emissary of your society?" Shevek returned to sit on the marble seat by the hearth, which he already felt as a seat, his territory. He wanted a territory. He felt the need for caution, but he felt more strongly the need that had brought him across the dry abyss from the other world, the need for communication, the wish to unbuild walls. "I come," he said carefully, "as a syndic of the Syndicate of Initiative, the group that talks with Uros on the radio these last 2 years. But I am not, you know, an ambassador from any authority, any institution. I hope you did not ask me as that." "No," Owai said, "we asked you. Shevek the physicists. With the approval of our government and the Council of World Governments, of course. But you are here at the private guests, as a private guest of Ian University. Good. But we haven't been sure whether or not you came with the approval of—" He hesitated. Shevek grinned. "Of my government? We know that nominally there's no government on Anares. However, obviously there's administration. And we gather that the group that sent you, your syndicate, is a kind of faction, perhaps a revolutionary faction." "Everybody on Anares is a revolutionary, Owai. The network of administration and management is called PDC, Production and Distribution Coordination. They are a coordinating system for all syndicates, federatives, and individuals who do productive work. They do not govern persons. They administer production. They have no authority either to support me or to prevent me. They can only tell us the public opinion of us, where we stand in the social conscience. That's what you want to know? Well, my friends and I are mostly disapproved of. Most people on Anares don't want to learn about Uros. They fear it and want nothing to do with the proprietarians. I am sorry if I am rude. It is the same here with some people, is it not? The contempt, the fear, the tribalism. Well, so I came to begin to change that." "Entirely on your own initiative," said Owai. "It is the only initiative I acknowledge," Shevek said, smiling in dead earnest. He spent the next couple of days talking with the scientists who came to see him, reading the books Pei brought him, and sometimes simply standing at the double-arched windows to gaze at the coming of summer to the great valley and to listen for the brief, sweet conversations out there in the open air. Birds. He knew the singers' names now and what they looked like from pictures in the books, but still when he heard the song or caught the flash of wings from tree to tree, he stood in wonder like a child. He had expected to feel so strange here on Uros, so lost, alien, and confused. And what he felt nothing of the kind. Of course, there were endless things he did not understand. He only glimpsed now how many things, this whole incredibly complex society with all its nations, classes, castes, cults, customs, and its magnificent, appalling, and interminable history. And each individual he met was a puzzle, full of surprises. But they were not the gross, cold egoists he had expected them to be. They were as complex and various as their culture, as their landscape, and they were intelligent, and they were kind. They treated him like a brother. They did all they could to make him feel not lost, not alien, but at home. And he did feel at home. He could not help it. The whole world, the softness of the air, the fall of sunlight across the hills, the very pull of the heavier gravity on his body, asserted to him that this was home indeed, his race's world, and all its beauty was his birthright. The silence, the utter silence of Anares. He thought of it at night. No birds sang there. There were no voices there but human voices, silence, and the barren lands. On the third day, old Atro brought him a pile of newspapers. Pei, who was Shevek's very frequent companion, said nothing to Atro, but when the old man left, he told Shevek, "Awful trash, those papers, sir. Amusing, but don't believe anything you read in them." Shevek took up the topmost paper. It was badly printed on coarse paper, the first crudely made artifact he had handled on Uras. In fact, it looked like the PDC bulletins and regional reports that served as newspapers on Anares, but its style was very different from those smudgy, practical, factual publications. It was full of exclamation points and pictures. There was a picture of Shevek in front of the spaceship, with Pei holding his arm and scowling. "First man from the moon," said the huge print over the picture. Fascinated, Shevek read on. His first step on Earth. Uras's first visitor from the Anares settlement in 170 years. Dr. Shevek was photographed yesterday at his arrival on the irregular moon freighter run at Pierre Spaceport. The distinguished scientist, winner of the C.O. Owen Prize for service to all nations through science, has accepted a professorship at Ioian University, an honor never before accorded to an off-worlder. Asked about his feelings on first viewing Uras, the tall, distinguished physicist replied, "It is a great honor to be invited to your beautiful planet. I hope that a new era of the all-Cetian friendship is now beginning, when the twin planets will move forward together in brotherhood." "But I never said anything," Shevek protested to Pei. "Of course not. We didn't let that lot get near you. That doesn't cramp a birdseed's journalist's imagination. They'll report you as saying what they want you to say, no matter what you do say or don't." Shevek chewed his lip. "Well," he said at last, "if I had said anything, it would have been like that. But what is all Cetian?" "The Terrans call us Cetians, from the world for our sun, I believe. The popular press has picked it up lately. There's a sort of fad for the word." "Then all Cetian means Uras and Anares together?" "I suppose so," Pei said with marked lack of interest. Shevek went on reading the papers. He read that he was a towering giant of a man, that he was unshaven and possessed a mane, whatever that was, of graying hair, that he was 37, 43, and 56, that he had written a great work of physics called "The Spelling Depended on the Paper, Principles of Simultaneity," or "Principles of Simultaneity," or that he was a goodwill ambassador from the Adonian government, that he was a vegetarian, and that, like all Anaresti, he did not drink. At this he broke down and laughed till his ribs hurt. "By damn, they do have imagination. Do they think we live on water vapor, like the rock moss?" "They mean you don't drink alcoholic liquors," said Pei, also laughing. "The one thing everybody knows about Adonians, I suppose, is that you don't drink alcohol. Is it true, by the way?" "Well, some people distill alcohol from fermented halum root for drinking. They say it gives the unconscious free play, like brainwave training. Most people prefer that. It's very easy and doesn't cause a disease. Is that common here?" "Drinking is. I don't know about this disease. What's it called?" "Alcoholism, I think." "Oh, I see. But what do working people do on Anares for a bit of jollity, to escape the woes of the world together for a night?" Shevek looked blank. "Well, I don't know. Perhaps our woes are inescapable?" "Quaint," Pei said, and smiled disarmingly. Shevek pursued his reading. One of the journals was in a language he did not know, and one in a different alphabet altogether. The one was from Thu, Pei explained, and the other from Benbili, a nation in the Western Hemisphere. The paper from Thu was well printed and sober in format. Pei explained that it was a government publication. Here in Aio, you see, educated people get their news from the telefax, the radio and television, and the weekly reviews. These papers are read by the lower classes almost exclusively, written by semi-literates for semi-literates, as you can see. We have complete freedom of the press in Aio, which inevitably means we get a lot of trash. The Thuvian paper is much better written, but it reports only those facts which the Thuvian Central Presidium wants reported. Censorship is absolute in Thu. The state is all, and all for the state. Hardly the place for an Adonian, eh, sir? And this paper. I really have no idea. Benbili's a backward sort of country, always having revolutions. A group of people in Benbili sent us a message on the syndicate wavelength, not long before I left Abene. They called themselves Adonians. Are there any such groups here in Aio? Not that I ever heard of, Dr. Shevek. The wall, Shevek knew the wall by now when he came up against it. The wall was this young man's charm, courtesy, indifference. I think you are afraid of me, Pei, he said abruptly and genially. Afraid of you, sir? Because I am, by my existence, disproof of the necessity of the state. But what is to fear? I will not hurt you, Sio Pei. You know, I am personally quite harmless. Listen, I am not a doctor. We do not use titles. I am called Shevek. I know. I'm sorry, sir. In our terms, you see, it seems disrespectful. It just doesn't seem right. He apologized winningly, expecting forgiveness. Can you not recognize me as an equal? Shevek asked, watching him without either forgiveness or anger. Pei was for once nonplussed. But really, sir, you are, a very important man. There is no reason why you should change your habits for me, Shevek said. It does not matter. I thought you might be glad to be free of the unnecessary, that's all. 3 days of confinement indoors left Shevek charged with surplus energy, and when he was released he wore out his escorts on his first eagerness to see everything at once. They took him over the university, which was a city in itself, 16,000 students and faculty, with its dormitories, refectories, theaters, meeting rooms, and so on. It was not very different from an Adonian community, except that it was very old, was exclusively male, was incredibly luxurious, and was not organized federatively but hierarchically, from the top down. All the same, Shevek thought, it felt like a community. He had to remind himself of the differences. He was driven out onto the country in hired cars, splendid machines of bizarre elegance. There were not many of them on the roads, the hire was expensive, and few people owned a car privately, because they were heavily taxed. All such luxuries, which if freely allowed to the public would tend to drain irreplaceable natural resources or to foul the environment with waste products, were strictly controlled by regulation and taxation. His guides dwelt on this with some pride. Aiho had led the world for centuries, they said, in ecological control and the husbanding of natural resources. The excesses of the 9th millennium were ancient history, their only lasting effect being the shortage of certain metals, which fortunately could be imported from the moon. Traveling by car or train, he saw villages, farms, towns, fortresses from the feudal days, the ruined towers of age, ancient capital of an empire 4,400 years old. He saw the farmlands, lakes, and hills of Avan province, the heartland of Aio, and on the northern skyline the peaks of the Mate Range, white, gigantic. The beauty of the land and the well-being of its people remained a perpetual marvel to him. The guides were right. The Urasi knew how to use their world. He had been taught as a child that Uras was a festering mass of iniquity, and waste. But all the people he met, and all the people he saw in the smallest country village were well-dressed, well-fed, and, contrary to his expectations, industrious. They did not stand about sullenly waiting to be ordered to do things. Just like an Anaresti, they were simply busy getting things done. It puzzled him. He had assumed that if you removed the human being's natural incentive to work, his initiative, his spontaneous creative energy, and replaced it with external motivation and coercion, he would become a lazy and careless worker. But no careless workers kept those lovely farmlands or made the superb cars and comfortable trains. The lure and compulsion of profit was evidently a more effective replacement of the natural initiative than he had been led to believe. He would have liked to talk to some of those sturdy, self-respecting looking people he saw in the small towns, to ask them, for instance, if they considered themselves to be poor, for if these were the poor, he had to revise his understanding of the word. But there never seemed to be time, with all his guides wanted him to see. The other big cities of Aiao were too distant to be reached in a day's tour, but he was taken to Neo-Asia, 50 kilometers from the university, frequently. A whole series of receptions in his honor was held there. He did not enjoy these much. They were not at all his idea of a party. Everyone was very polite and talked a great deal, but not about anything interesting, and they smiled so much they looked anxious. But their clothes were gorgeous. Indeed, they seemed to put all the light-heartedness their manner lacked into their clothes and their food, and all the different things they drank, and the lavish furnishings and ornaments of the rooms in the palaces where the receptions were held. He was shown the sights of Neo-Asia, the city of 5 million, a quarter the population of his whole planet. They took him to Capitol Square and showed him the high bronze doors of the Directorate, the seat of the government of Aiho. He was permitted to witness a debate in the Senate and a committee meeting of the directors. They took him to the zoo, the National Museum, the Museum of Science and Industry. They took him to a school where charming children in blue and white uniforms sang the national anthem of AIO for him. They took him through the electronic parts of factory, a fully automated steel mill, and a nuclear fusion plant so that he could see how efficiently a proprietarian economy ran its manufacturing and power supply. They took him through a new housing development put up by the government so that he could see how the state looked after its people. They took him on a boat tour down the Suez estuary, crowded with shipping from all over the planet, to the sea. They took him to the high courts of law, and he spent a whole day listening to civil and criminal cases being tried, an experience that left him bewildered and appalled, but they insisted that he should see what there was to be seen, and be taken wherever he wanted to go. When he asked, with some diffidence, if he might see the place where Odo was buried, they whisked him straight to the old cemetery in the Trans-Suez district. They even allowed newsmen from the disreputable papers to photograph him standing there in the shade of the great old willows, looking at the plain, well-kept tombstone. Leia Asayo Odo, 698 to 769. To be whole is to be part, true voyage is return. He was taken to Rotorede, the seat of the Council of World Governments, to address the plenary council of that body. He had hoped to meet or at least see aliens there, the ambassadors from Terra or from Hain, but the schedule of events was too tightly planned to permit this. He had worked hard on his speech, a plea for free communication and mutual recognition between the new world and the old. It was received with a 10-minute standing ovation. The respectable weeklies commented on it with approval, calling it a disinterested moral gesture of a human brotherhood by a great scientist. But they did not quote from it, nor did the popular papers. In fact, despite the ovation, Shevek had the curious feeling that nobody had heard it. He was given many privileges and entrees to the Light Research Laboratories, the National Archives, the Nuclear Technology Laboratories, the National Library in Neo, the Accelerator in Mefed, the Space Research Foundation in Drio. Though everything he saw in Uros made him want to see more, still several weeks of the tourist life was enough. It was all so fascinating, startling, and marvelous that at last it became quite overwhelming. He wanted to settle down at the university and work and think it over for a while, but for a last day's sightseeing he asked to be shown around the Space Research Foundation. Pei looked very pleased when he made this request. Much that he had seen recently was awesome to him because it was so old, centuries old, even millennia. The foundation, on the contrary, was new, built within the last 10 years, in the lavish, elegant style of the times. The architecture was dramatic. Great masses of color were used. Heights and distances were exaggerated. The laboratories were spacious and airy. The attached factories and machine shops were housed behind splendid Neo-Satan porticos of arches and columns. The hangars were huge, multicolored domes, translucent and fantastic. The men who worked there were, in contrast, very quiet and solid. They took Shevek away from his usual escorts and showed him through the whole foundation, including every stage of the experimental interstellar propulsion system they were working on, from the computers and the drawing boards to a half-finished ship, enormous and surreal in the orange, violet, and yellow light within the vast geodesic hangar. "You have so much," Shevek said to the engineer who had taken charge of him, a man named Ogeo. "You have so much to work with, and you work with it so well. This is magnificent. The coordination, the cooperation, the greatness of the enterprise. Couldn't swing anything on this scale where you come from, eh?" the engineer said, grinning. "Spaceships? Our space fleet is the ships of the settlers came in from Uros, built here on Uros, nearly 2 centuries ago. To build just a ship to carry grain across the sea, a barge, it takes a year's planning, a big effort of our economy." Ogeo nodded. "Well, we've got the goods, all right, but you're the man who can tell us when to scrap this whole job. Throw it all away." "Throw it away? What do you mean?" "Faster than light travel," Ogeo said. "Transillions. The old physics says it is impossible. The Terrans say it is impossible, but the Hainish, who after all invented the drive we use now, say that it is possible, only they don't know how to do it, because they're just learning temporal physics from us. Evidently, if it's in anybody's pocket, anybody in the known worlds, Dr. Shevek, it's in yours." Shevek looked at him with a distancing stare, his light eyes hard and clear. "I am a theoretician, Ogeo, not a designer. If you provide the theory, the unification of sequency and simultaneity in a general field theory of time, then we'll design the ships, and arrive on Terra, or Hain, or the next galaxy in the instant we leave Uros. This tub, and he looked down the hangar at the looming framework of the half-built ship swimming in shafts of violet and orange light, will be as outdated as an ox cart. You dream as you build, superbly, Shevek said, still withdrawn and stern. There was much more about Ogeo and the others wanted to show him and discuss with him, but before long he said, with a simplicity that precluded any ironic intention, I think you had better take me back to the keepers. They did so. They bade farewell with mutual warmth. Shevek got into the car and then got out again. I was forgetting, he said. Is there time to see one more thing in Drio? There isn't anything else in Drio, Pei said, polite as ever, and trying hard to hide his annoyance over Shevek's 5-hour escapade among the engineers. I should like to see the fort. What fort, sir? An old castle from the times of the kings. It was used later as a prison. Anything like that would have been torn down. The foundation rebuilt the town entirely. When they were in the car and the chauffeur was closing the doors, Chafoilis, another probable source of Pei's ill humor, asked, What did you want to see another castle for, Shevek? Should have thought you'd had enough old ruins to hold you for a while. The fort in Drio was where Odo spent 9 years, Shevek replied. His face was set, as it had been since he talked with Ogeo. After the insurrection of 747, she wrote the prison letters there and the analogy. Afraid it's been pulled down, Pei said sympathetically. Drio was a moribund sort of town, and the foundation just wiped out and started fresh. Shevek nodded, but as the car followed a riverside highway toward the turnoff to Io-Iun, it passed the bluff on the curve of the river Siese and pulled up, and up on the bluff there was a building, heavy, ruinous, implacable, with the broken towers of black stone. Nothing could have been less like the gorgeous, light-hearted buildings of the Space Research Foundation. The showy domes, the bright factories, the tidy lawns and paths, nothing could have made them look so much like bits of colored paper. That, I believe, is the fort, Chafoilis remarked with his usual satisfaction at placing the tactless remark where it was least wanted. Gone all to ruins, Pei said. Must be empty. Want to stop and have a look at it, Shevek? Chafoilis asked, ready to tap on the chauffeur's screen. No, Shevek said. He had seen what he wanted to see. There was still a fort in Drio. He did not need to enter it and seek down ruined halls for the cell in which Odo had spent 9 years. He knew what a prison cell was like. He looked up, his face still set and cold, at the ponderous dark walls that now loomed almost above the car. I have been here a long time, the fort said, and I am still here. When he was back in his rooms, after dinner in the senior faculty refectory, he sat down alone by the unlighted fire. It was summer in AIO, getting on toward the longest day of the year, and though it was past 8, it was not yet dark. The sky outside the arched windows still showed a tinge of the daylight color of the sky, a pure tender blue. The air was mild, fragrant of cut grass and wet earth. There was a light in the chapel across the grove and a faint undertone of music on that lightly stirring air. Not the birds singing, but a human music. Shevek listened. Somebody was practicing the numerical harmonies of the chapel harmonium. They were as familiar to Shevek as to any Arasti. Odo had not tried to renew the basic relationships of music when she renewed the relationships of men. She had always respected the necessary. The settlers of Veneres had left the laws of man behind them, but had brought the laws of harmony along. The large, calm room was shadowy and silent, darkening. Shevek looked around it, the perfect double arches of the windows, the faintly gleaming edges of the parquet floor, the strong, dim curve of the stone chimney, the paneled walls, admirable in their proportion. It was a beautiful and humane room. It was a very old room. This senior faculty house, they told him, had been built in the year 540, 400 years ago, 230 years before the settlement of Veneres. Generations of scholars had lived, worked, talked, thought, slept, died in this room before Odo was ever born. The numerical harmonies had drifted over the lawn, through the dark leaves of the grove for centuries. I have been here a long time, the room said to Shevek, and I am still here. What are you doing here? He had no answer. He had no right to all the grace and bounty of this world, earned and maintained by the work, the devotion, the faithfulness of its people. Paradise is for those who make paradise. He did not belong. He was a frontiersman, one of the breed who had denied their past, their history. The settlers of Veneres had turned their backs on the old world and its past, opted for the future only. But as surely as the future becomes the past becomes the future. To deny is not to achieve. The Odonians who left Uros had been wrong in their desperate courage to deny their history, to forgo the possibility of return. The explorer who will not come back or send back his ships to tell his tale is not an explorer, only an adventurer, and his sons are born in exile. He had come to love Uros, but what good was his yearning of love? He was not part of it, nor was he part of it. He was not part of it, nor was he part of it, nor was he part of the world of his birth. The loneliness, the certainty of isolation that he had felt in his first hour aboard the Mindful, rose up in him and asserted itself as his true condition, ignored, suppressed, but absolute. He was alone here because he came from a self-exiled society. He had always been alone in his own world because he had exiled himself from his society. The settlers had taken one step away. He had taken two. He stood by himself because he had taken the metaphysical risk, and he had been fool enough to think that he might serve to bring together two worlds to which he did not belong. The blue of the night sky outside the windows drew his eyes. Over the vague darkness of foliage and the tower of the chapel, above the dark line of the hills, which at night always seemed smaller and more remote, a light was growing, a large, soft radiance. Moonrise, he thought, with a grateful sense of familiarity. There is no break in the wholeness of time. He had seen the moon rise when he was a little child, from the window of the domiciled in wide plains with Palat, over the hills of his boyhood, over the dry plains of the dust, over the roofs of Abanay, with Tokfur watching it beside him. But it had not been this moon. The shadows moved about him, but he sat unmoving as Anares rose above the alien hills, at her full mottled dun and bluish-white lambent. The light of his world filled his empty hands. And that is all of chapter 3. And I won't do chapter 4 until Sunday evening.